Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Richard, and welcome back to a stock market outlook video sponsored by MarketSmith. And this week we started off with a negative expectation breaker on this Monday because of the gap down and close right near the lows. And it's a negative expectation breaker because last week we ended strongly with a nice upside reversal, undercutting rally of the 50 SMA, and then some fall through on Friday. So the expectation last week was that we continue to move up, maybe find some resistance up here near 14,000, and then potentially challenge all-time highs later on. But instead, what we got, if we erase all these lines here, is a gap down and close right near the lows. So breaking expectations, and we had some continued fall through to the downside, found support down here, had an inside day on Thursday, and then a nice close to the week on Friday. But we're still below a declining 21 EMA, and we are also below that 50 SMA. So at this point, kind of trendless here, just going sideways, basing within this area. However, if we go over to the S&P 500, this looks much stronger. It did find support at the 50 SMA, is back above that 21 EMA, and continues to trend really nicely. The IWO is the reason why a lot of growth investors, growth traders are frustrated at this moment. It's still basing, actually had an undercut and rally last week, and once again had a strong close, but we're below a declining 50 and 21 EMA. So at this point, growth stocks in general are still just consolidating their massive 2020 gains. So that's a quick overview of the indexes in MarketSmith, and overall in this video, we'll talk about potential new leadership. We'll talk through the old leaders, which are still, for the most part, basing. Then we'll talk about indexes once again. We'll talk about my previous watch list, sentiment from a few different sources, the IBD Big Picture article, and finally the GMI signal from richardlmoglen.com. If you do enjoy my analysis, I would really appreciate it if you go ahead and leave a like down below on this video, and subscribe if you are new and want to see more videos just like this one every single week. So let's start things off with potential new leadership. Let's sort by that weekly change. And overall ASO continued to trend higher. Nice strong move and breakout with volume coming through, and pretty much just held up last week above the 21 EMA, but overall much stronger than the S&P 500, as you can see from the RS line, breaking out into new all-time highs. And moving on to NUE, this is also very strong, trending above the 50 and 21 EMA. And you can see just basically consolidation last week. Facebook, expectation breaker here on Monday, a gap down and continued selling, but a strong end to the week with Friday being very strong, although it was on lower volume. UPS, very strong move here, and once again, a little bit of consolidation this past week, but you can see the RS line is still right near all-time highs as the stock price breaks out into all-time highs as well. So it looks very strong, but it might need a few weeks, let the 21 EMA catch up before this could be actionable for a swing trade setup, potentially through these highs at 220. FTX as well, right near all-time highs, but downside reversal action on this Monday. And once again, this could use a few weeks to kind of form out a flag here above the 21 EMA, let the 50 SMA catch up before potentially blasting off towards all-time highs. STLD also trending above the 21 EMA, looks great, and you can see that the up volume is higher than the down volume. That's always good to see. But once again, it could go sideways for a few more weeks, let the 21 and 50 SMA catch up, and then present a pretty good swing trade setup through a potential pivot like it did back here in April of this year. Yeti, pretty vicious shakeout here back to the 50 SMA, but nice volume on the recovery, and it could be actionable through this kind of sideways level, this horizontal level at around 90, but it is kind of hard to manage risk, maybe at the low of this day, but it's right near all-time highs, looks pretty strong, and holding up much better than the rest of the kind of traditional growth stocks. Google, similar to Facebook, expectation breaker on this Monday after a kind of hesitation candle on this past Friday, but overall closed the week strong, although you can see the up days were on lower volume than the down days. DE, still within this kind of horizontal consolidation, had a downside reversal here on Monday, but overall held the 50 SMA, and at this point is still just kind of going sideways, kind of stuck within this range from about 390 down to 365 or so. Zim trending beautifully above the 21 EMA, very strong action to end the week, doing a lot better than most growth stocks at this point. But once again, it's come very far in a short amount of time, and at some point it will need a longer term base, not these kind of short, stubby 3-week shelves. And it probably at some point will visit the 50 SMA. Crocs, strong earnings gap up here, then move up and now pull back due to the overall market, but it's holding up pretty well, holding this low nicely. And once again, it could go sideways for a few more weeks, set up like pins last year, but definitely one to watch because of that strong earnings gap up. This is a telltale sign that institutions are involved. Look at the volume coming in on this bar. FCX move up and then a downside reversal bar on Monday and now a pullback, but overall not kind of breaking expectations too much, holding above that pivot, but you can see the down volume is much higher than the up volume at this point. RH pulling back in a short-term downtrend, lost the 21 EMA this past week, but is holding up above this kind of short-term shelf. And at this point, it doesn't look too bad. The 50 SMA could provide support as this kind of bases out and potentially flags out here at about 600 to 650 or so. WSM, another recent earnings gap up, big kind of failure candle here on the breakout, and then continues selling from that point, but did find support at the 50 SMA, which could provide a pretty good low risk, high reward opportunity. You've got an inside day, I believe, on this Friday. And yeah, this looks good. Once again, huge earnings gap up. You always want to be on the lookout for stocks showing this type of action. Moving on to Vail, you can see a downside reversal bar on this Monday. If we go to a weekly, it's also a downside reversal on higher volume. So this might need a few weeks to kind of set up once again a potential kind of shorter term undercut and rally setup or some other swing trade type setup. But it is holding above this pivot nicely, and overall the RS line is an uptrend despite this pullback. ATKR also pulling back to the 21 EMA, doesn't look too bad. The downside volume is higher than the recent up volume, so that is one thing to consider, but pretty good action on Thursday and Friday. LPX breaking the 21 EMA for the first time in quite a while, and you can see this also had very high volume on that day. So this might need a longer term base, maybe a pullback to the 50 SMA, but overall this is a very strong uptrend from this base consolidation at about 35. CBE, big downside reversal bar on this Monday, and this is why if you're buying breakouts, you have to take some profit when you have them. At one point, this is up 10% or so. So at that point, you want to move up your stop to break even or even 1-2% in the green. So if it does reverse like this, at least you have a green trade at the end of the day. But overall, it pulled back and is now below that 50 SMA and 21 EMA, but did have a inside bar on this Friday. DEN also kind of breaking trend here below the 21 EMA for the first time in quite a while. And like some of the other trenders here, it could need a longer term base, maybe a pullback to the 50 SMA, even 65 EMA. And lastly, we've got RVLV, another example of taking some profits on these breakouts when you have them, because this bar completely breaks expectations, breaks this low, as well as all these lows right here. So at this point, really wide and loose below the 21 and 50 SMA, and really needs to set up here before I would be interested. So overall, a lot of these price and volume leaders did have pullbacks this past week, but many of them are holding above their 21 EMAs, which is a good sign. Moving on to the old leaders, many of these are below declining 21 and 50 SMA, so they need more time to base out and kind of consolidate their huge 2020 moves. But overall, Peloton was the best performer, up almost 70% this week, and potentially could have set in a low here at about the low 80s, high 70s here. And you can see a big bar here on the earnings report, but it has recovered that since and now faces the 21 EMA and 50 SMA if it makes it up that far. So potentially a low here, but it's not kind of my style to pick these lows. I like to buy as they prove themselves near the top of the base and set up short-term kind of consolidation pivots. But overall, a strong move and definitely showing some RS this past week, and RS stands for relative strength. CLH, also a strong move up the right-hand side, retaking the key moving averages. This day was an earnings report, so some volatile action here, but overall a strong close on good volume. And I think CLH is definitely one to have on your radar if you can move up here, tighten up, go sideways for a few weeks, and then challenge these highs and eventually all-time highs. PLTR still below declining 21 and 50 SMAs. Still needs a lot of time, still basing at this point. Strong action, though, on this Tuesday. I believe this is also earnings. And once again, this could be a intermediate term low. Net, some kind of wild action, but overall a strong end to the week on this Friday, taking out these highs. And once again, a very strong bar on this Tuesday. Roku, finding support here at these kind of key anchored VWAPs, but once again, still below declining 21 and 50 SMAs. Needs a little bit of time here, but is forming a little bit of consolidation here at about 300, 315. Crowd also forming a pivot here at this high, which is at 195.35. And overall, it is below these declining 21 and 50 SMAs, which could provide some resistance. But if it can push through those like CLH, this could be the start of a move up the right side of this base. ETHE below declining 21 and 50 SMAs after this huge earnings gap down, but it is holding this kind of pivot back from this prior consolidation, as well as the kind of huge high volume close here on Thursday due to the earnings gap down. So not really on my radar, but depending on your style, this could be actionable through these highs and through maybe an undercut rally of the high volume close. Pins below a declining 21 and 50 SMA and below the 200 SMA. Looks like it needs a little bit of time. Twilio also below those key levels, but finding support at the earnings gap up anchored VWAP. ENPH below all those key moving averages. Shop below those as well. Once again, below all those basing. Twitter as well had a huge earnings gap down and has actually failed this kind of lower trend line here and is back below the 200 SMA. So this definitely needs a bunch of time. TSM basing here and looks like it just barely had an undercut and rally here of this prior low. So this could be actionable depending on your kind of risk tolerance and preferred setup. EXPI still within a downtrend below all the key moving averages. Upwork lost this anchored VWAP from the earnings gap up, which had been support previously, but a strong bar on this Tuesday. And so far it is holding the kind of 37 to 40 range at this time. Fiverr also below all the key moving averages, doesn't look too great. Apps pulling back into the 200 SMA, and depending on your risk tolerance and preferred setup, whether you're a long-term investor, this could be a spot to pick up some shares at the bottom of a potential base. Corsair still kind of flattening out here below the anchor VWAP from the top here, and also below all the key moving averages. TDOC below all the key moving averages as well, and the RS line tells the true picture here. Severe underperformance versus the rest of the market. FFTY potentially forming out a base here, but once again below all the key moving averages except the 200 SMA. SC below these key moving averages, above a rising 200. NEO below all the key moving averages, including the 200 SMA, and looks like it still needs a little bit of time along the left side of this base. GRWG found support at the 200 SMA as well as the low of this prior base. But it is below a declining 21 and 50 SMA at this point. SQ finding support at the 200 SMA. And finally, we've got Tesla also potentially finding support at that key moving average. So overall, a lot of basing here, but you do have some challenging their 200 SMAs, which definitely you want to see hold if you are holding shares at this point. And moving on to the weekly charts of the indexes, the QQQ had a nice move off the lows here. The expectation is sideways or higher, and overall we are in a stage 2 uptrend. And we were down 2.34%, but we had a strong daily closing range of 82% on Friday, a weekly closing range of 61%. Looking at the SPY, this is much stronger. Overall down 1.31%, but it had a daily closing range of 79%, weekly closing range of 67%, and we are in a strong stage 2 uptrend. The expectation is sideways or higher. Looking at the IWM, once again, a strong move off the lows here. We are in a stage 2 uptrend, and overall this index was down 1.94% on the week, with a daily closing range of 93% on Friday and a weekly closing range of 67%. Looking at semiconductors, this is definitely a little bit weaker than the rest of the Nasdaq. Overall down 4.21% on the week with a daily closing range of 79%, weekly closing range of 58%, an undercut and rally of the 30-week, and the expectation is sideways or higher, but it does have a little bit of a worse closing range than the other indexes. Moving on, let's talk about Bitcoin GBTC. Which overall also found support at the 30-week, but a pretty poor close here. The expectation is pretty much sideways or lower. Overall down 15.89% with a daily closing range of 28% and a weekly closing range of only 34%. ETHE, the Ethereum trust here, overall was up 4.95%. And you can see it had a nice move off the lows here, but it only had a daily closing range of 31% on Friday, so maybe some weakness end of week. And a weekly closing range of 52%. So the expectation is sideways, but it is kind of short-term extended at this point. So I wouldn't be surprised if it kind of back and fills to potentially this pivot down near 28. Moving on, let's talk about the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF. Overall, nice undercut rally of the 30-week. We are in a stage 2 uptrend. The expectation is sideways or higher, potentially a 2-2 reversal through this high next week. That would be very promising for growth stocks And overall, we were down 3.11% with a daily closing range of 96% and a weekly closing range of 59%. Looking at GLD or gold, you can see we had a nice push through the 30-week, and now it has acted as support. But you want to see this line kind of flatten and then start to increase, and that would be the sign of another stage 2 uptrend like we saw back here. Moving on, let's talk about the VIX. A quick push up here, but then a fade to the end of the week. And lastly, let's take a look at the Dow Jones ETF, the DIA. Once again, a strong move off the lows here, but the expectation is sideways or higher. Overall, we're down 1.04% with a daily closing range of 78% and a weekly closing range of 56%. So that is a run through of the indexes. Nice strong tails on many of them, and the expectation for the most part is sideways or higher. And we've got a lot of potential for 2-2 reversals if that occurs, or potentially we'll have a nice inside bar. Let me try to draw that here. A nice inside bar, and then potentially an inside bar and up in 2 weeks from now. So moving on, let's talk about my previous watch list, and let's sort that by the weekly change. HAYM is definitely an earnings gap up to watch here, and it had a strong move 2-2 reversal here on this Friday after a nice upside reversal bar on this Thursday, undercutting the lows right here. So this looks pretty strong, definitely an earnings gap up to watch. And you can see it made an RS new high before price on this Friday. Moving on to WOOF, this is still within this kind of institutional due diligence phase, but it is forming a nice structure here and a powerful move on this Friday, a 2-2 reversal and 3-bar break. But the one drawback is really no volume to speak of on this bar. So potentially some consolidation before challenging these kind of intermediate highs right here. Next up, we've got UNFI, nice move off the 50 SMA here. But once again, not super high volume, and you really want to see that come in through these levels. ASO, we already covered. COWN, a nice move late last week off the 50 SMA, but definitely a fade early in the week. I don't like the volume on this down bar. TBI, still within this kind of flag here after the huge earnings gap up. I've drawn this downward trend line here, and this will be on my watch list this week as well. And we'll see if this can kind of push through here. It is a low dollar volume stock, so keep that in mind. A little bit riskier, less liquidity. And moving on to AMET, you can see it kind of fell apart early last week and then kind of recovered a little bit of that, but this decline was on higher volume. And overall, this doesn't look great. Chips in general aren't faring too well. So we'll see if this can kind of build up a structure, move back above the key moving averages, then kind of tighten up, and then potentially I would be interested for a setup. MVCR undercut these lows, which isn't a great sign, but you do have a declining trend line here to draw in. I would like to see it kind of retake that level, as well as the 21 EMA, as well as the kind of close from this bar here. FND really fell apart here, found support at the 50 SMA, but at this point, there's no real setup here. FANG, once again, downside reversals here near the kind of pivot and fell back to the 50 SMA area, but a little bit wide and loose here at this moment. THO definitely fell apart after this expectation breaker, this undercut of all these lows here, and then pulled back way below the 50 SMA. So at this point, it needs time. It needs to form out another base consolidation pivot. Orgo also fell apart, broke expectations here with a 3-bar break through these lows, as well as the 50 SMA, and at this point just needs a longer term base. CPE, we already talked about. RVLV, we covered as well. And lastly, we've got SLQT, which kind of failed the green line here. So you want to be out on this bar before this gap down, I believe, due to earnings. So that is a run through of my last watch list. Not really a great performance due to the overall market weakness early in the week, especially, but we'll see what happens this week as well. And moving on to sentiment, let's talk about my sentiment surveys. Overall, we saw an increase in bullishness from 43.6% last week to now 44.3%, still on the lower end, and we'll see if the market kind of climb a wall of worry on the way up as we potentially rally next week. Looking at the name exposure index, we saw a big drop from 87.79 to now 46.86. So this is good from a contrarian point of view, and we'll see how this number turns out next week. Looking at the bulls versus bears poll, this is still pretty extended, but back below 60, which is a good sign. Looking at the put call ratio, this did peak nicely for the highest point in quite a while, but it's back kind of in this middle range here. But we did see a nice burst up as we potentially bottomed last week. So moving on to the IBD Big Picture article, the headline is stock market closes that week with a bang, but Nasdaq still faces key tests ASML gives buy signal. Reading through, they discuss a strong action on Friday, but they do point out how the Nasdaq Composite is still below its 50-day moving average. They discuss some other indexes here. ASML had a strong move up 4% on Friday, and you can see it had a successful test of the 10-week moving average. Moving on, they talk about weakness in Disney on Friday. Goldman Sachs continues to do quite well, as well as other financial stocks. You've got RF here breaking out on a weekly chart. Some energy stocks they mentioned here, XEC, PDCE, and WLL. And they recommend that we look for stocks outside the tech sector and with RS strength lines right near all-time highs, which is definitely something that I'm doing at this moment. And overall, their current outlook is an uptrend under pressure, and we have 6 distribution days on the S&P 500 and 5 on the Nasdaq, so definitely a little bit elevated in this department at this moment. And finally, we've got the GMI signal, which is red at this point since May 12th, and we had a GMI score of 1 out of 6 on Thursday. So overall, my current view, like IBD, is an uptrend under pressure. We're not seeing a lot of fall through in terms of breakouts. Growth stocks, the IWO, Nasdaq are still below their 50 SMAs and kind of basing here. And until we see them kind of retake those key moving averages, it's going to be an environment where it's best to take quick profits when you have them, move up those stops to break even quickly, and overall be a little bit more defensive. And cash is a position at this point. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this provides some helpful guidance. If you did enjoy it, please go and leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos.